An exciting World Series Game 1. A little bit of back and forth. It looked like the Astros had Max Scherzer up against the ropes. Managed to walk that tightrope, keep his team in it. 5 innings, 2 earned runs for Scherzer, 7 strikeouts, 3 walks. Seems like there was traffic all the way through, but he managed to keep it going. And the Nationals, relief pitching generally pretty solid. Garrett Cole loses his first game at home since May 22nd as the Nationals take the long time off. Sometimes you can get rusty. You have that much time off. They look rusty at times, but they take game 1 5-4. Game 2, of course, tomorrow. We'll have it right here at the Fan. My name is Sean Drotar. This is the Fan Late Night. Thanks for joining me. And the Denver Broncos made a move that I had talked about last week. Thought it would happen. Thought it should happen. They have traded Emmanuel Sanders to the San Francisco 49ers, one of the last 2 unbeaten teams in the league, for a 3rd-round pick and a 4th-round pick. The Broncos also sent a 5th, by the way, to San Fran in the deal. So a bit of an upgrade there. You could kind of argue the Broncos they upgraded 1 round and got a 3rd, which to me seems like an awfully good return given the circumstances. I think that's pretty impressive given the fact the Broncos are bad. The Broncos are always going to be they were going to be looking at trading certain people. There was no other way around it. But the 49ers get a weapon who should be comfortable, by the way, in an offense. Rich Scangarello was part of that offense with San Francisco last year. It's not that necessarily different. So we will see. So the Broncos can double dip here in theory a little bit. So, they have a chance to not only get what they've gotten for Sanders, but they will have compensatory picks conceivably coming in the 2020 draft. Matt Paradis, Bradley Roby, Shaq Barrett, Max Garcia, Billy Turner. Some of those guys could potentially be compensatory picks as well. Some of them may be as high as a 5th, so you might be able to get that 5th back. So for the Broncos, they add draft picks for Emmanuel Sanders. The question, of course, is you got draft picks for a productive wide receiver. Now, he wasn't coming back. Chris Harris isn't going to come back either. Derek Wolfe isn't going to come back either. Should they be next? Who knows? But in Sanders' case, I think the deal made sense. The question now, I guess I would have for you, if you'd like to reach out, the RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. You can call it or text it. Great. They have draft picks. Do you trust John Elway and Matt Russell and the rest of that staff to make the right draft picks? There are plenty of reasons why you shouldn't. And there's some reasons why you should. I think the last 2 drafts have been vastly improved. I don't necessarily think they've been extraordinary, but they haven't been bad drafts. For the Broncos now, Joe Flacco has been mediocre at best for the Denver Broncos. He loses one of the most significant weapons that he had. Sanders was the 2nd leading receiver on the team in targets, in yards, in touchdowns, in average per catch, you name it. Leaves a gaping hole, by the way. The Broncos' next leading wide receiver is Deshaun Hamilton, with half the catches that Sanders have and fewer than a third of the yards. And obviously, if you're remembering the opening game, no touchdowns for Hamilton either. The only other receiver on the team at all with receptions is kick returner Deontay Spencer. Has 2 catches for 13 yards. That's it. Now, as the Broncos get back to practice following this trade, they also get closer to a situation in which they can look at removing guys from the injured list. Elway indicated straight up John always said that Tim Patrick would be one of the two players they bring back. The other three that are options are tight end Jake Butt, running back Theo Riddick, and quarterback Drew Lock. Let you know that probably Patrick is going to be a decent part of the equation going forward, but that's not in the near term. Always said Patrick would move to the active roster after the bye. That is November 17th. It's 2 games and a bye week away. That would be when you'd see Tim Patrick back. I've made the argument for weeks now, and I will continue to make it, that that's also the game in which Drew Lock should make his debut as the Broncos starter. But how do you feel about it? Obviously, this is a major player for the Broncos. Not only now, but over the course of his career. No, he's not a lifelong Bronco like Chris Harris or Derek Wolfe. But this was his 6th season with the Broncos. He only played 4 in Pittsburgh. This is the team he's played most of the time for in his career. Do you like the trade? Do you think it's the only trade they should have? Or do you think it should just be the starting point for more trades to come? The Broncos have interesting decisions that they have to face now. We'll talk about those and break them all down next. Kevin Kistner in the booth. Emmanuel Sanders is perfectly alive and well. In fact, he upgraded to an undefeated team today. Yeah, the sad music playing. Sanders, by the way, now a San Francisco 49er after today's trade. The Broncos send Sanders and a fifth to the 49ers for a second and a third round pick in next spring's draft. Sanders put up some better numbers than you might think. 404 receptions as a Bronco is seventh all-time on the franchise. 5,361 yards, 10th all-time. Touchdowns, 28, 12th all-time. Yards per game as a receiver, 68.7 ranks fourth all-time. But the number of games he played, 39th all-time. Only 78 games. By any real measurement, Sanders is likely to be considered and should be considered one of the best wide receivers the Broncos have ever had. Certainly one of the most productive wide receivers. Did the Broncos get good value? Are you happy with it? Obviously, a lot of people interested in talking about it. We'll go right to the RamosLaw.com text line. That's 303-713-1043. If you would like to participate, we'll start with Terry. Hi, Terry.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm all right.
I hope Emmanuel, the best of luck to him. I hope the best for the guy. The question I have, should they have really re-signed Flacco when they did? I think they jumped the gun on that. It's like, no, wait until the end of the season. Let's see what happens. I think they just re-signed him way too quick.
I couldn't agree more, Terry. I've been really harping on it since the day it happened. It made no sense. I liked the Flacco addition when he had a one-year deal, when he was a free agent after this year. I liked that move because the idea would be you find out if Drew Lock can play. If he can, then you let Flacco go with no penalty. If you don't, then you can keep Flacco around. The idea behind the restructure was apparently in part to make a statement to Flacco, but also to free up some money. The Broncos used some of that money to sign Andy Janovich, but they didn't really need as much as they freed up. I agree with you. On the bright side when it comes to Flacco, the money that they'd have to get out from under is not that awful if they make a deal after June 1st, whether they cut or trade him. Now, if you did it before June 1st, yeah, yikes. It's $13 million in dead cap money. That's a lot. But if it's post June 1st, it's 3.4. Now, that's money you didn't really. I'm with Terry. The Broncos didn't have to do that. There was no need to do that. There was no guarantee that Flacco was going to be very good, and he hasn't been very good. I'm still not entirely certain why they did it, except they kind of painted themselves into the corner with their salary cap because you keep trying to fix bad drafts with adding free agents. So they kind of had to have the maneuverability. But the Flacco contract is not so odious that they can't get out from under it if they can find a dance partner after June 1st, or even if they just have to cut him, because the end result to the Broncos would essentially be the same, a dead cap hit of $3.4 million. Roll over, talk to John. John, how are you?
Hey, Sean, I'm doing fine, man. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. First of all, just to respond to your last caller and your last subject, the Broncos offense going forward, post Emmanuel Sanders trade, losing that wide receiver spot, look at the going forward 2019 and after. Drew Lock can come in for Flacco. Yeah, Flacco's $15 million dead money next year if we cut him, so he's rostered next year.
Well,
but Drew Lock's is
not John, not necessarily, because if the Broncos move away from Flacco after June 1st, that dead money drops to $3.4 million.
Okay, Sean, you're right. I won't challenge you. That was just a small blip on the map.
Yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
So they look at going forward next year. Okay, training camp. You have Drew Lock and an expensive Joe Flacco at QB2.
Okay.
You have Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman at running back. You're not using Devontae anyway. You re-signed Jano. Wide receiver, you have 9 games to determine. Obviously, Courtland Sutton is a rising star, number one wide receiver. But what do you have in Deshaun Hamilton, elevating Tim Patrick from the IR? And any wide receiver you have, you're going to determine that. But we still have 2 wide receivers, I think. What we need is O-line. That's atrocious. We need 3 or 4 draft picks on the O-line. But I think the offensive skill position with Fant at tight end, Hireman signed. I think we're fine at tight end. It's just the O-line, and I think the offensive set. What do you think?
Well, John, I agree. I mean, I think offensive line is priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. I've argued that as well. I think the Broncos' problems certainly start there and go out from there. The idea with the receiver, and I guess I look at it in football, and I look at what positions are dependent, right? Certain positions are not dependent. Well, offensive line really isn't dependent, right? You either block your guy or you don't. You have total control over that. A quarterback is a dependent position because you have to have your offensive line do your job. A wide receiver is a doubly dependent position because you have to have your quarterback deliver the ball on time and on target, and you have to have the line block so your quarterback can deliver on time and on target. So, yeah, I look at the situation with wide receiver as being the hood ornament on your car, okay? It's nice to have. It's kind of the last part you need. And so I think that you can fill that. I think that you can find serviceable wide receivers. I think the Broncos have so far to go on their offense that the last thing they need to worry about is who's going to be the other wide receiver. You throw Hamilton in there, you see if he can figure it out. When Patrick's healthy, you throw him in there, see if he can figure it out. Try Juwan Winfrey, see if he can figure it out. You know you got one in Sutton. You know you've got one. The other one, okay. That's fine. That's why I didn't have a problem with the Sanders trade. That's why I thought it would happen. I think he's going to leave anyway. But I don't think there's a huge rush. I'd be frustrated beyond words if the Broncos decided to use a first-round pick on a wide receiver. That would be insane. John, I'm with you entirely. You have to go lineman, and then another lineman. And then after that, probably a lineman. Then after that, maybe 2 more linemen. And then after that, a couple more linemen. And then after that, then you could pick another lineman. That's what the Broncos need to do in the draft, both offensive and defensive. But none of it matters, right? The Broncos couldn't run the ball at all against the Chiefs, who are an atrocious defense, and by the way, didn't even have Chris Jones. Their nose tackle on the best guy on their line. They didn't even have him. Broncos couldn't move it because they can't do anything on the offensive line. It's got to be about the line. Broncos added a couple picks. Maybe they can do something about it this time. They have blown picks on the line before. Many of them, as a matter of fact. There's no two ways about it. You look in John Elway's draft history, starting in 2011, and you look at the guys in the first 3 rounds that he drafted at the line. Orlando Franklin, good pick. Not saying that just because he's a coworker, works here. Good pick. Had a nice career. That worked out. Good pick. Didn't pick any in the top 3 rounds in 2012. Picked Philip Blake, who immediately washed out in the 4th. 2013, didn't pick any in the first 3 rounds. Picked Vincent Painter in 2013 in the 6th round. Immediately washed out. 2014, picked a lineman in the 3rd round. Michael Schofield. Michael Schofield with the Broncos looked like a bright orange traffic cone. To his credit, he's sort of become serviceable.
I never thought I would say that I miss Michael Schofield at right tackle.
I still don't. Those mental scars will not heal, but good for him. I mean, he's still in the league, which makes him better than a lot of always picks. Matt Paradis was picked in the 6th, by the way. Obviously, a phenomenal selection, but if I don't take away the credit for guys that were picked late at the same time. If everyone knew Matt Paradis was going to be that level guy, he wouldn't have lasted until the 6th. There's a little bit of luck involved there. 2015 second round pick Tyson Brilo. Ugh. 2016. Your number 5 selection, Connor McGovern, is your starting center. The only problem is he's actually a guard. There's that. 2017, Garrett Bowles. Stan Lee used to say, "Nuff said." Last year, 2016, Sam Jones. Nope. Didn't make the team this year. Their 6th rounder. And then this year, Dalton Reisner. Okay. Now we're talking. In a pick where you were expected to find a performer, the Broncos finally found one. They finally found one in John Elway's tenure in a guy you expected to be a performer. Great. So maybe you believe there. He had 2. Orlando Franklin in 2011, Dalton Reisner this year. But yes, you need line, and more line. You're absolutely right. Is Emmanuel Sanders the last guy out the door? Should he be? We'll talk about that next. That was John Elway. Conference call today down at Dove Valley. We'll see how it goes indeed. Remember, 11 days ago, John Elway said that no one was on the trading block. Now, Emmanuel Sanders is a San Francisco 49er, which, give the 49ers credit. They are 6-0, and they are 6-0 despite their leading receiver, Marquise Goodwin, having 181 yards in total. That's their leading receiver. 16 catches, 181 yards. Dante Pettis, expected to have a breakout year, has been a disaster. 9 catches in 6 games. Emmanuel Sanders immediately becomes their best receiver. If not their best pass catcher, that might still go to George Kittle. But they haven't had anyone on the outside. I would expect him to make an immediate impact for the NFC's last unbeaten team. And they've been getting it done without really any significant danger through the air. So a good move, I think, for both parties. Sanders was not going to come back. He's a free agent after the year. He's 32 years old. Why would you come back to a team that's had 3 straight losing seasons? You'll be asking the same questions, of course, about Chris Harris Jr. and Derek Wolfe, first and foremost. Broncos have other significant free agents. Justin Simmons and Will Parks spring to mind, but they're not getting traded. They're going to hopefully get signed with that money that they freed up when they restructured Joe Flacco and extended him into multiple seasons from now. Sanders' case, the numbers on it, by the way, the Broncos saved $10 million off the cap, maybe more that they can get a deal done if necessary with a couple of their own free agents, Shelby Harris, the aforementioned Simmons and Parks, and dead cap money of $2.69 million. So those are the particulars of the deal, as Sanders and a 5th go to San Francisco for a 3rd and a 4th rounder. I have no problem with the deal. I have none whatsoever. The question that I ask is, should he be the last guy out the door? No, the Broncos receiving starting pair is vastly less impressive today. But Elway was asked specifically about Harris now that Sanders has been dealt. Harris has expressed some displeasure in the past, kind of wanting to move on somewhere else. The contract negotiations with the Broncos got contentious. He's also a free agent. Here was Elway's response. Not lately. Well, free agent deadline isn't for another week. 29th, to be exact. We'll see. Elway also didn't finish that by saying, no, not lately, and we're not looking to trade him. He just said, no, not lately. And I don't blame Elway at all. I think in that case, you need to keep your options open. You got better value than I think anyone expected for Sanders. I know there was talk that Mohamed Sanu, of course, was dealt also today. Dealt to the Patriots from the Atlanta Falcons. And for a little better value, quite frankly. But it's not an apples-to-apples comparison either. So it's an interesting spot now that you're getting a little more baseball-like when you get down to the trading deadline, the NFL, something that fans really haven't seen. It's gotten exponentially more crazy in the last couple of seasons. Sanu goes from the Falcons to the Patriots for a second-round draft pick. That's another team, by the way, that has one receiver in Julian Edelman and then some guys. So getting Sanu makes sense. But the reason, of course, you get more for a guy like Sanu is pretty straightforward. Sanu is 2 years younger than Emmanuel Sanders. Sanu isn't coming off the same kind of injury concern as well. And he's signed for more than a year. So I think given all the differences there, I think the Broncos did great in this trade. Now, The problem is when you make these kinds of deals, you're not exactly dealing from strength. Let's be honest here. The odds on your third-round pick this year, or your fourth-round pick, being as good as Emmanuel Sanders are essentially zero. Okay? There's no two ways around that. Essentially, the odds are zero. You have downgraded. But you were going to lose him for nothing. And so that makes sense. That's a fit that I can live with. I think that the Broncos made a good move. Now, should they trade Chris Harris? Talked about this a little bit over the last couple days, about Harris and Wolf. The idea that you can also get compensatory picks. What are they going to be worth? Tough to say on that. You don't necessarily know what the market will bear, but you have an idea if you look at previous years. I think for Derek Wolf, it's probably worth moving on if you can get a sixth or better. The idea that a fifth, I'm not even convinced you can get that necessarily. But I would still do it for a sixth or better. I think that makes some sense. Then the Broncos can jumpstart a rebuild. Now, they won't call it a rebuild, I'm sure, but it's a rebuild. So if you can get a sixth or better in the next week for Derek Wolf, you probably do it. You put Adam Gotsis back in. He's a free agent after the year 2. You let him play out the string. You hope that a motivated Gotsis looking for his next contract will play well opposite Shelby Harris, and you roll the dice because the Broncos aren't going to the playoffs. And the truth of the matter is, for those who are still wearing the orange glasses and believed this, put no way around it. Trading Emmanuel Sanders and making Deshaun Hamilton your starting wide receiver is a straight-up white flag. Let's not mince words here. That is the Broncos, and I commend them for it. Commend them for it. That is the Broncos throwing up the white flag on the season, going, okay, it's not going to happen. Let's get going on 2020. The Bill Belichick, of course, he never has to say that because he's always good in the single year. We're on to 2020. That's what the Denver Broncos are. They're on to 2020. This season is an afterthought. We'll just see what happens. Hopefully your young guys get experience. Hopefully maybe you can sign some of your upcoming free agents that you like. But that's what this is. Basically all this is. It's a white flag on the season. So if you're waving the white flag, that's what you're going to do as the Denver Broncos. Well, then why not go all in, right? Why not start making some more moves? I would trade Wolf for a sixth or better. If you get a fifth, I'd jump all over it. Harris is a different story because Harris will still command decent money on the free agent market. Now, you don't get your compensatory picks for next spring's free agents until 2021. But you look at Deshaun Hamilton at the moment being the next man up, the starter. If you move on from Chris Harris, your starting cornerbacks are Devontae Harris and Duke Dawson Jr. I actually sort of like the potential of both those guys enough that I want to see more from them. But that would be the worst starting pair of cornerbacks in the league by a mile. And maybe the Broncos, it might be best for them to lose a lot of games and get better draft picks. I get that, but that's just not what the Broncos culture is about. And I don't know what message it sends to the young guys. If you keep saying to these same young guys, remember the Dolphins traded a lot of people away for their tank job. If the Broncos are planning on going forward with the younger guys they have, it's a pretty dangerous thing to do to essentially tank the year. So unless I'm getting a second-round pick for Chris Harris Jr., nope. No thanks. I'll keep him. We'll play out the string. He's going to be motivated. He needs to get that new contract. To do that, he needs to play well. He needs to not show the over 30-plus curse to scare off a team. Second round or keep him.
But, Sean, if he's not going to stay here next year and re-sign, then you're just going to let him walk?
Yeah.
Why just not trade him now?
Because you'll hope for the compensatory to be pretty good. And in the meanwhile, like I said, you can't just throw in. You're maybe throwing in the towel on a season at a certain point. But if you're going with a defensive cornerback pair, now that we know that Isaac Yiadom can't hold that job down, of two guys that you got, by the way, post-final cuts as your starters, it's not a good look. So I think that's a big part of it as well. Didn't forget enough. Did you like it? You think should be the last guy out? You heard a little bit from John Elway. On the other side, well, we'll hear more from the guy who runs the show down at Dove Valley. Next. Denver Broncos trade Emmanuel Sanders after the season effectively comes to an end in an embarrassing loss last Thursday against Kansas City. In that game, by the way, Emmanuel Sanders ended up playing 59 snaps in that game against the Chiefs. The game before that, against the Titans, he played 25 snaps. In the game before that against the Chargers, he had only played 38 snaps. So 13 snaps different from the win against the Chargers to the win over the Titans. In a game where Denver ran the ball more and Sanders had been battling a knee injury for the last couple games. Keep that in mind when you listen to John Elway talk about this trade on a conference call from down at Dove Valley this afternoon. Not going to get into that, what happened after the Tennessee game. So I wanted to look closer at that because a lot of people were making the conclusion that Emmanuel Sanders somehow pulled himself out of the game or refused to go in or something like that. Well, you can go back and look at the play-by-play. You can go look at the snaps that were taken. And I just don't see any indication that Sanders refused to play the game. Nobody's reported that. And I guess I would say it this way. There are 3 sides to every story, right? Mine, yours, and how it went. Right? Very rarely is it going to be one person's side of it is completely accurate. The other side is completely wrong. Not likely. Sanders told Channel 4, by the way, on his part, as he left, he said, obviously it's hard anytime you break up. We had a great run out here in Denver, a lot of great times. Slightly different opinion than Elway's. I have no doubt, I'm not suggesting that John Elway's, he didn't say anything of the variety that Sanders benched himself or anything like that, but sort of intentionally left things vague for people to fill in the blanks, right? And when you do that, most people don't go, well, they were running the ball a lot and he had been coming off of a knee injury and maybe there wasn't as much of a need for him as well. And he wasn't really part of a lot of the play calling. Okay, that doesn't sound as fun, right? People want to jump to the conclusion. Sanders took himself out of a game. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But to just take Elway's side and say that's absolutely what happened is just kind of unwise. I'm not saying that John Elway's lying, but I'm saying that it's his perspective on things. Emmanuel Sanders probably has a different perspective, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Sanders worked really hard to get back from an Achilles injury. He's played hard for this team. He's played hurt for this team. And he went out and played a lot of snaps against the Chiefs, too, by the way. So the idea that Emmanuel Sanders wouldn't, and then come out and what? Play the whole game against the Chiefs? Doesn't hold water. What I suspect happened is Emmanuel Sanders asked, as John Elway did confirm, asked for a trade. He just hadn't been as big a part of the equation on this team. Sutton had become the number 1. The Broncos were flailing. Yeah, he wanted to move on. He was going to be a free agent anyway. This was the discussion, by the way, before Sanders asked for a trade. It's been going on all year. Regardless, he is gone. Deshaun Hamilton's the starter. Tim Patrick will come back in just under a month. And that's what the Broncos will roll with for the rest of the year. You comfortable with that? Does it even matter what they do the rest of the year for you? And who's the other person that's going to come off the injured list? We'll talk about all of that next. Well, I don't know much about the health of all the people on the IR, but I know they can return either Drew Lock, Jake Butt, or Theo Riddick. And if it's not Drew Lock, I hope you enjoyed this season, Bronco Country, because you'll be reliving it in 2020 if Drew Lock is not the guy taken off IR. It is just that simple. No other way around it. Said it all season long since they lost to the Raiders in opening week. The Broncos' most important goal remaining in the season is to find out if Drew Lock is your franchise quarterback going forward or not. It is by far the most important thing remaining for the Broncos to accomplish, and one of the few things, by the way, that they can. If you do not find out if Drew Lock is your franchise quarterback or not, and you do end up with, say, a top 10 pick in the draft, you think John Elway's going to use it on a quarterback if Drew Lock isn't activated from the IR and doesn't play a single game this year? I don't. I don't think Elway's going to burn a first-round pick on a quarterback when he hasn't seen the quarterback that he picked in the second the year before. I don't know if Drew Lock's the guy, or he is going to be the guy or not. I don't know. Neither do the Broncos, which is why they have to find out. They have to find out. That November 17th start against Minnesota following the bye week is the perfect time. It's what the Denver Broncos have to do. If they don't, they are kicking the can down the road, and the 2020 season will be just like this one. Maybe Joe Flacco will be here, maybe he won't. But instead of Drew Lock working out those rookie bugs in the system this fall, he'll be doing it next fall. And you won't be looking at Tua or Jake Fromm or Justin Herbert or whoever you like, because the Broncos aren't going to pick a first-round quarterback without seeing what their second-round quarterback can even do. Yeah, I know they'd like to get Theo Riddick involved. I get it. Small potatoes. You have to find out who the quarterback of this team is for the long term, because it's not Joe Flacco. So now you found that out. So good. Good. That was one goal. Is it Joe Flacco? How much does Joe Flacco have left in the tank? Is he actually secretly still really good? And the Ravens just unfairly jettisoned him for Lamar Jackson? And the answer is no. He's pedestrian. Pedestrian isn't going to cut it. All about finding out what Drew Lock can do. Single most important goal left in the season. If anybody but Lock is taken off of IR, assuming Tim Patrick will be one of the two, after John Elway basically said he would be, 2020 season is already toast. Mark it down. Go over to the RamosLaw.com text line, 303-713-1043. That's where Mike's been holding. How are you doing, Mike? Thanks for waiting.
Doing well. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for asking.
So I was kind of thinking that maybe Emmanuel Sanders feels like he's kind of getting like freeze-out treatment, Isaiah Thomas on Jordan, in that if they don't feature him and he doesn't have good numbers, then nobody will offer him good contract next year, and they can get him on the cheap. And considering how hard Emmanuel worked to get back into playing condition, he wanted to have obviously a huge season so he could go make bank next year. And I think that, that coupled with an injury or, maybe even just a lingering one, he's like, I'm not going to go risk, giving up my livelihood for, somebody who's just playing me.
Well, Mike, part of it, let me ask you this, because part of what you said I agree with, part of what you said I don't, and here's why. He played an enormous amount of snaps in the Kansas City game. So if that was the case, if he was basically...
But if he had already decided he was going to trade him at that point, then maybe one last game, let's try to feature him, so I can get max trade value.
Well, that didn't exactly work out, did it? He played
well,
played in
I think
88% of the
there were more
offensive
issues
snaps.
than
That may be
there are
true.
more
Mike,
issues than that.
let's take the first part because I think you're probably right. Look, if I'm Emmanuel Sanders, I'm worried about putting up big numbers to get my next contract. Do you blame him? And do you blame him
no,
for
not at all.
necessarily saying, hey, one thing we've learned with the Broncos, remember, John Elway made Peyton Manning take a haircut in his final season money-wise. Remember that, right? Elway has been cold-blooded when it comes to dealing with the business side of the equation.
But to be fair, he did take a pay cut too when he played here.
Oh, that's all well and good. But if you're going to, every time we ever hear it's a business in the NFL, right? Normally you hear it from the team side, not the player side. So I don't have a problem with so many of the players, and maybe including Emmanuel Sanders going, you know what? You guys want to treat us like it's a business when you don't feel like paying our salary anymore? Well, I'd like to get a new contract, and this team's bad, and you guys want to feature Sutton, and that's fine. Send me somewhere where I can make a difference. And I have no problem with Sanders making that complaint. Do you?
Oh, no, not at all. And especially with the work that he put in the offseason to get back where he was. Because, obviously I think he tried so hard because he wanted to have a huge season. And then once things started going south, it was like, okay. And then it's like, all right, well, we're not going to feature you anymore. And, it sucks if you have a bad season. And it's like, oh, but, we can pick you up for $8 million next year because, you didn't have a great season. Nobody wants to offer that to a 32-year-old, wide receiver.
Right. Thank you for the call, Mike. I think that's true. And you know what? I'll be totally honest. And maybe the worm is finally turning. But Mike, I want to give you credit because there aren't a lot of people that I get either on the text line or on the phone lines that basically will be okay with that. The idea that, look, teams treat it like it's a business when they don't want a player anymore, right? You had a contract, but nope, they don't. Whatever. We don't want that. Doesn't matter. So I have no issue. And I appreciate that Mike understands the idea. Yeah, so Emmanuel Sanders was dogging it? Okay. He had to work his tail off to get back from an Achilles injury. Not an insignificant injury, okay? Not at all an insignificant injury. Worked back and did all that. I'm like, come on. No. I think that's a good take there, Mike. I think it's more than reasonable for Sanders to ask for a trade. I think it's reasonable for Chris Harris to ask for a trade, although Chris Harris is going to seem to have ample opportunities to put up good stats on defense. Broncos' offense is already terrible, and it just got a lot worse. But I just don't have an issue with Sanders asking for a trade. I don't know. I haven't seen it reported anywhere. I wasn't on the sidelines, but the people who are in the know that report on that, I haven't heard anybody say he took himself out of the Tennessee game. Watched that game. I didn't see him take himself out of the Tennessee game. The Broncos were cruising. They ran the ball. Sanders had been struggling with the knee injury, by the way, in the Chargers game, which, by the way, they won both of those two. So I don't want people necessarily fall for the narrative. Keep in mind, and again, I'm not saying that John always lying or making anything up. I'm saying he's saying things from his own perspective. But don't just fill in the blanks and take one person's perspective, because let me be completely honest about this. I will preface it again. I'm not saying John Elway is lying. I'm saying John Elway is speaking about things from his perspective. But it is worth noting, if you can villainize Emmanuel Sanders on the way out, if you can throw Emmanuel Sanders onto the bus and say, well, we traded him because he was being selfish, who does that hurt? Emmanuel Sanders. Who does that potentially help in case that trade looks bad? John Elway. That's pretty good reason to make sure you plant a couple seeds of doubt into people's heads. Right? Let's just think about this logically. Who, if anybody, stands to gain for making Emmanuel Sanders look bad? It's only John Elway. I'm sure he's speaking his opinion, but I'm sure his opinion and his perspective are altered by where he stands in his job. Emmanuel Sanders has been a really good player for this team for 5.5 seasons. Really good. Really good. And over the show, I'll run those numbers back for you again. Really, really, really good. And I think that's the way it should be remembered, too. We'll talk about it more next. We'll get back to the Denver Broncos in a moment, but we have a couple fun segments we'd like to throw around here. Also, but we'll kind of cram them into one because we got the late start because of the World Series. But a couple fun little bits that we have to look at. One of them would be my stat of the night, and that happened tonight. By the way, Juan Soto, the terrific outfielder for the Washington Nationals, in tonight's in today's 5-4 win over the Houston Astros, in Houston, mind you. Soto, by the way, went bonkers. If you didn't really hear it, I mean, it went well. We'll have all those games here, of course. He became the second youngest player in baseball history to hit a home run in his first World Series game, by the way. Fourth youngest player ever to hit a home run in a World Series game. Finished the game 3 for 4 with 3 RBIs. That's good. How good? Well, this good. According to the good folks at Elias Sports Bureau, Soto's only the 9th player in history with at least 3 hits and 3 RBIs in his first ever World Series game, but the only one to do so before his 21st birthday was Andrew Jones. He had 2 home runs and a single, 5 ribbies in Game 1 of the 96 World Series. He was 19. So Soto in very, very good company as the World Series begins. So that would be the stat of the night. And we have another one we like to do. We have a little one doing, you can cue us up for you. We have the time machine. Thought about maybe skipping it, but since I think Broncos country, judging by the RamosLaw.com text line 303-713-1043, let's just say that I think Broncos fans understood that this trade was necessary at this stage, but didn't like it. Well, I'm here to let you know there have been worse October 22nds in the history of the Denver Broncos. 19 years ago, I still can see it in my mind. I remember this, plain as day, screaming at my television, somebody tackle him. Corey Dillon of the Cincinnati Bengals laid waste to the Broncos defense, running for 278 yards against the Broncos at the time, an NFL record that had stood since 1977. Corey Dillon broke Walter Payton's record of 275, Dillon with 278 against the Broncos on this date. Ugh. Still, mental scars from that. 19 years ago. It has since been broken by Jerome Harrison, Jamal Lewis, the current record holder, Adrian Peterson. Broke it in 2007. But Dillon in that game, 278 yards. Oh my goodness. I mean, just look at the box score for that, and it's just insanity. Absolutely crazy. Akili Smith in that game, by the way, which the Bengals won 31-21. Akili Smith was the quarterback of the Bengals. He went 2 for 9 for 34 total yards. The Bengals had a total of 34 yards passing because Scott Mitchell came in and threw him an 0 for 5. 34 yards passing in a game the Broncos lost because Corey Dillon had 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. Oh, and that wasn't all, by the way, in case you're curious. Peter Warrick, his backup, only had 3 carries. He had 90 and a touchdown. 90. All in all, the Broncos gave up 407 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground on this date 19 years ago. That's our time machine. So next year's October 22nd is got to get better for the Broncos, right? Something. Shouldn't have to make trades you had no choice to make because you've painted yourself into a corner. Ugh. That Corey Dillon one. I still remember that game. Unbelievable. Just plowing over everybody. Big old shoulder pads. Goodness. Go real quick to the RamosLaw.com text line and look over a lot of the text here. A lot of activity, as you'd expect. A lot of good text. Asked early on, remember this, you got the picks. 720-388. No, I am not comfortable with John Elway and Matt Russell making the picks. Well, that's really the question, isn't it? That's the catch. Because what the Broncos require is going to be those picks. Mark Johnson texted in and said, I believe this is how Elway rekindles the vision that Pat Bowen has, suggesting that Von Miller will also be traded, as will Chris Harris and Derek Wolfe. Not entirely sure about that necessarily, but there you go. A lot of suggestions to trade Von Miller, by the way. Charles from Aurora said, because the Broncos need offensive linemen, shouldn't you make sure that Mike Munchak is in the draft room with you? Oh, my, yes. Oh, my. Actually, beyond in the draft room with you, if you're talking about drafting offensive linemen, how about just move out of the way and let Mike Munchak draft him? Just do that. Just be like, oh, we're going to draft a lineman. Mike, what do you think? We'll just pick one of those. Okay. Someone did point out that I was talking about the starting, if they trade Chris Harris, the starting defensive backfield of Devontae Harris and Duke Dawson Jr. to be the worst in the league. For the 913, I think Bryce Callahan could be back versus Cleveland. Oh, yeah. I sort of forgot he was on the team, because he's still injured from last year, and the Broncos signed him anyway. But in theory, yeah, he's supposed to come back. There's that. Also from the 913, getting a third-round pick for Chris Harris Jr. is possible. A second-round pick, impossible. No way. I'm inclined to agree. Grayson texts in, Drotar, would you trade Von Miller straight up for a top 15 first-round pick? I would, and then use your extremely high pick. You would get one of those amazing young quarterbacks coming out and maybe one of the best offensive linemen available. What do you think? Grayson, I think there is no chance someone's going to give you a top 15 pick for Von Miller in what is statistically his worst season in years. So, no. From the 720-770, I'm happy for Emmanuel Sanders. He couldn't have been dealt to a better situation. I agree. It's actually great. He becomes the immediate number one receiver. Again, not the number one target, that's Kittle, but number one receiver on an unbeaten team that still has a lot of upside. I love that fit. I love that fit for Sanders. I think that fit for Sanders is not only good enough to get him some stats, but also he might be a long-term fit for the Niners. Might be a really good fit for the Niners. Niners, they look at it as a rental right now. Don Graziano of ESPN said that they're looking at him as a rental, but they're not going to close the door on something. If he's a perfect fit with Garoppolo, why would you shut the door? And then about 6 texts in a row that hate the trade, not that John Elway made him a good trade, but because he had to make it at all. From the 303-947, I was 6 rows behind the bench watching Sanders. He was checked out from the get-go. It is dysfunctional at best in Bronco land. Could be. Very next text, Sanders was sick of losing and sick of the garbage culture that Elway has created around here. Woof. Text, I'm 100% okay with Sanders not being here. Another player will take his place. But I'm not 100% okay with John Elway as the GM moving forward. One of the arguments straight out, the more interesting one that we'll talk to, and we'll continue to talk about it. 970-744, Locke wasn't ready before his injury. He won't be ready after being on IR. Playing him this year will mess him up more than help him. I completely and totally disagree. I'll explain why in a bit. I will. But we come back. Denver Nuggets. Let's get positive up in here. Denver Nuggets, by the way, open tomorrow. We have our Nuggets insider, Matt Moore. He's coming up next. All right. The idea that Drew Lock is somehow going to get messed up if he plays this season, that it somehow keeps him from being the player he can be if he doesn't get experience, that just doesn't hold water. I'll explain why next. The Denver Broncos need to start Drew Lock at quarterback on November 17th at the Minnesota Vikings, period. Period. Trading Emmanuel Sanders is the final white flag on the season. Other trades may be forthcoming. John Elway said that he hadn't heard about recent discussions about Chris Harris Jr., but also didn't rule out the idea of other trades, nor should he. Quite frankly, this team is rebuilding, whether they want to admit it or not. I've been telling you this for months. So the next step and the most important step is that Drew Lock needs to play. And the best week for Drew Lock to play is against the Vikings. He needs to get off the injured list. He hasn't had an opportunity, by the way, to talk or to practice with his teammates. He needs to be able to get all that down. And then you have a bye week in which you can get him ready to play on the road, which is the best place to play rookie players. That's the spot. And there have been suggestions that this somehow would be bad for him. Coming into the draft, and I think even after the draft, more than a few people were pleasantly surprised that Drew Lock was even available in the second round for the Broncos. Most mock drafts had him going in the first, and I think it was something of a surprise. But if you look at franchise quarterbacks, let's just look at first-round quarterbacks, right? Unquestionably, if you draft a quarterback in the first round, you want that guy to be your franchise guy. I'm just going to go over the last 5 seasons. The quarterbacks picked in the first round over the last 5 seasons and when they started. Okay? 2015, Jameis Winston started his very first game. 2015, Marcus Mariota started his first game. The jury may still be out on whether those guys are franchise quarterbacks, but up until at least the Broncos beat the Titans, Mariota was the starter, and Jameis Winston's been the starter ever since. 2016, Jared Goff started in his 10th game. Carson Wentz in his first. Paxton Lynch even started his 5th game. Even Paxton Lynch started the 5th game of the season. In Goff and Wentz's case, you found out, yeah, they're the answers. Paxton Lynch, you found out, nope, he's not. 2017, Mitch Trubisky started his 5th game. Patrick Mahomes his 16th. Somewhat extenuating circumstances because they had Alex Smith. Deshaun Watson started his 2nd. What'd you find out? Mahomes and Watson? Yup. Trubisky? Jury's still out, but they certainly haven't had anybody they've gone after since. 2018, Baker Mayfield is 4th. Sam Darnold is 1st. Josh Allen is 2nd. Josh Rosen is 4th. Lamar Jackson is 10th. Getting rid of Joe Flacco, by the way, putting him on the bench and having him end up on the Broncos. Mayfield, bad year. Still, I think the Browns have faith he's their guy. Darnold, you know the Jets have faith he's their guy, even despite the bad performance against the Patriots, which, mind you, no one's done what the Patriots have done in 85 years. Go 7-0 with allowing fewer than 50 points. Josh Allen, I think the Bills feel pretty good about him. Josh Rosen, no. The Cardinals moved on, but they found out, didn't they? Would they have been better off if they waited and then tried it this year? Probably not. Lamar Jackson in his 10th game, yeah. They moved on from Joe Flacco. It's pretty obvious that was the way to go. And nobody questions it now, do they? But Rosen didn't pan out. Cardinals found out they didn't like it, and they moved on. Had they have kicked the can down the road, for example, as people are suggesting, and maybe not started Josh Rosen, because behind a bad offensive line, and remember how many times the Broncos sacked him. Maybe that would have ruined Josh Rosen. Well, if they had not found out whether he was the guy or not, well, they wouldn't have Kyler Murray. They do, because they found out the guy they picked wasn't the right guy. Now they have Kyler Murray, and now, by the way, they have hope. Daniel Jones started his 3rd game. Dwayne Haskins his 5th. Just this year already. If you believe the quarterback you picked can be your franchise guy, you don't wait for the Goldilocks situation to play him, because guess what? It's the NFL. Those situations don't exist. You don't get picked in the first round by the Patriots when they have Tom Brady. That's not how it works. There is no perfect situation in which you can put in the guy who you hope is going to be your franchise quarterback. Otherwise, you wouldn't be picking high in the first round to get him. 970 the response. Lynch only started because Simeon was hurt. He also started because the Broncos needed to know if he could play. Locke was clearly not ready. He's not ready now, and throwing him now is not going to suddenly make him ready. He'd be hard-pressed to start behind the best line in the league, and behind this league, he's going to learn nothing and risk a career-ending injury instead. He's going to risk a career-ending injury every time he plays a football game. And if you think the Broncos' 2020 line is going to be night and day better, I got news for you. It won't. Because they've invested a first-round pick in Garrett Bowles. They made Juwan James the highest-paid right tackle in the history of football until it was surpassed a little bit later. Think those guys are going anywhere? Think the Broncos are going to get vastly better? Nope. You think the Cardinals were worried about Josh Rosen behind their terrible line? Not really. They wanted to see if the guy could hack it. If you're not going to put Drew Lock in a season, by the way, that is already gone by the wayside, so you're going to throw him in 2020 and let him learn there, well, that's fine, but I hope Broncos country doesn't have the expectation of making the playoffs in 2020. Lock's going to take his lumps one way or the other. Okay? The Browns weren't exactly fantastic when they brought in Baker Mayfield. You played him. Cardinals aren't good. They played Kyler Murray. The Giants don't seem too worried that their lousy team is going to break Daniel Jones. If your guy is the franchise guy, you'll know. And the most important thing the Denver Broncos can do is find out, because guess what? They might have a pretty high first-round draft pick again. Their starting wide receiver is now Deshaun Hamilton. If the fans get what they want, at least on the RamosLaw.com text line, their starting cornerbacks are going to be Devontae Harris and Duke Dawson Jr. until and unless Bryce Callahan comes back. Who knows when Juwan James will play? You don't get to pick the perfect situation. You have to play him. Think the Broncos would have liked to have not thrown Noah Fant in on day one? One of the hardest positions in the league to learn as well? Probably, but guess what? That's not how it works. If the Broncos don't activate Drew Lock when he's healthy and play him, they're being foolish. All they are doing is extending this misery further on purpose when they could at least get closer to a resolution and an understanding by learning what they have in Lock. I don't know if you watched Lock at Missouri. I don't know if you've ever seen an interview with Lock or talked to Lock. Let me tell you, he's not lacking in confidence. Okay? I don't think after a few sacks, Drew Lock is going to go, oh no, this league is scary. What will I do? Which is good, because those guys aren't your franchise quarterbacks. But there's only one way to find out. And you better find out, because the Broncos aren't going to draft a quarterback in the first round if they haven't even seen their second rounder play yet. It's the only thing that's left for the Broncos. Decide who to trade, that's fine. That really doesn't make that much of a difference. But to find out who your quarterback is, yeah, it's everything. It's the most important thing the Broncos have left to do this year. We'll be back tomorrow following World Series Game 2 right here on this station. Right here, like it was today. We'll find out if the Astros can even things up at home tomorrow. We'll be on after that. Kevin Kistner in the booth. Thank you, Kevin, for everyone who interacted. Phones, text, all of it. It's always great talking to all of you. It's your show. Thanks for listening. My name's Sean Drotar, S. Drotar on Twitter. That's SDROTAR. This is the Fan Late Night on Denver's Sports Station, Sports Radio 104.3, The Fan.